Serious question. I do not understand half of what he is talking about, but I think I am missing something obvious. Story 1. I haven't watched him in 6 years, but I remember being 22 and in my one-bedroom apartment with no furniture watching his lectures. The interviewer asked him what he wanted to tell young men, and he said, "You need to understand that you have something unique to offer other people, and the world will be a better place if you can get your act together and offer it." I spent the rest of that night crying my eyes out because nobody had ever said that to me. He helped me get clean, go back to school, and finish my degree. Is that pathetic? Probably, but I don't care. I needed to hear it. Story 2. A lot of young guys are feeling lost and getting a lot of messaging about what they're supposed to be doing about everyone else's problems in the media. Then somebody shows up and starts talking about them, what their problems are, what's causing them, who to be and how to act to fix them, and who's making them worse. If you don't have a good support structure, it may be the first time you've heard someone even mention that you might have problems, rather than just warning you not to be one. It's not hard to see how it hooks. Story 3. His early material is where you need to go. Find a clips channel of his work that is about 6 to 7 years old. He expressed things differently than others did and then presented solutions to the problems in almost a therapeutic way. It wasn't the political topics or the culture war issues that made him popular. It was the clips of him saying, "Yes, you have this problem. Try this and see where that takes you." And it seemed to have really resonated. Story 4. Everyone is already saying it, but it is because young men are told by society that they are the problem. They feel lost in a society where they are expected to be a provider but do not earn enough to fulfill that role by themselves, and their expectations are overwhelming. I have only listened to bits and pieces of his message, so I am not sure what it is, but I am sure whatever it is certainly better than the message they are getting elsewhere. In Australia, suicide is the #1 cause of death for males aged 15 to 44. Story 5. If you feel like no one cares about you, the first person who shows they care will have a special place in your heart. For many young men, Jordan Peterson was the first adult who addressed their concerns in how he spoke about society, strange analogies and all. If you had a Venn diagram of people who don't understand the appeal of Peterson and Tate and think men don't have any real problems, you just have a circle. The more people downplay real and extensive issues, the more confused they'll be when men latch on to anyone who makes them feel seen. That unusual Canadian professor is the closest thing to an advocate many young boys have ever seen, and that's quite a concerning thing. Story 6. I think Shoe on Head said this, but basically, those kinds of people are the only people making young men feel seen. Men have been so neglected in today's society that young men today feel completely lost and out of touch. And here comes someone speaking directly to you, saying you have what it takes to be a man. All you have to do is etc. When looking at it from that angle, it's kind of hard to imagine why it took so long to really get heated. Story 7. Empower. Verb. To promote self-actualization. Jordan Peterson is popular because he's one of the very few trying to promote a message that will empower boys and men. The left demonizes men. The right demonizes all but an extremely narrow and wholly untenable view of men. What's left? Where do young men go? When they're feeling the pressure of the world on their shoulders and they weren't even taught how to shave, how do they find a place in the world that brings them past the lowest survival levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or even up to those levels for many? Then comes along Peterson with messages like, "I get you, you have value, I see your struggle, it's valid, and here's how you can manage that struggle." Then there's his suggestions, which are as generic as any newspaper horoscope, but it's something. Clean your room, be responsible, have a purpose. Sure, if you grew up being empowered, those messages will likely sound ridiculous. But for the millions who didn't have that privilege, those messages are revolutionary. Peterson is successful because he is empowering to men, and that is something men have been lacking. Story 8. I'd like to chime in and give more context on Jordan Peterson, as he is in a different era now. Years ago, before he really gained his fame or notoriety, his content that I watched was genuinely insightful and encouraged critical thinking and introspection. I would watch his lectures, and he even had a series where he analyzed biblical stories and brought out deeper meanings in the text. All of that content really helped me back then to stay introspective and keep my philosophy sharp, I think. But in recent years, especially after his health has failed him a couple of times, He seems to have become a different person with less desirable views from what I hear. If anything, I'd encourage you to check out his videos when he was a doctor of philosophy, especially the ones where he was actually holding lectures. They were genuinely engaging stuff. Story 9. I'm a leftist who appreciates Jordan Peterson's work. When you are a young man with no support group, desperate for anyone to make you feel wanted, you'll latch on to the first person who makes you feel like you are worth something. For many young men, or men in general, Jordan Peterson is that person. Look at what he talks about. Clean your room, make yourself presentable, form a set of goals, and make a plan to achieve those goals. Surround yourself with people who want the best for you, and so on. You don't have to agree with his political opinions, but you can agree with his message. There are a lot of lost men out there who want nothing more than to feel like they matter. That is what makes Jordan Peterson appealing to them. Story 10. Well, I was in my mid-20s when he rose to prominence. Every second of every day, I was on the verge of a panic attack, barely holding it together. He first came out speaking against some law, and his keenness of mind and capability in debate were impressive. But the main thing that strikes me about him is how he doesn't let fear control what he says. He says what he means, regardless of how that affects how he's perceived. I rarely see anyone like that nowadays. No one has any courage or solidity. So that was impressive and made me look into his other work. Lo and behold, a treasure trove of lectures on a subject I find very interesting. Psychology, personality, intelligence quotient, and so on. Next thing I know, I'm watching him every day, all the time, over and over. This goes on for a long time. I love the information, the delivery, the phrasing, the thinking, all of it. It just really appealed to me. Then he does interviews, debates, and more, and it's like the guy was gradually putting the solid ground back beneath my feet. It felt like it had been gone for years, like people and the culture and thinking had changed in such a way that my entire understanding of the world, my place in it, and more was swept from beneath my feet. Now this guy is putting it back, bit by bit, and not only that, rebuilding it stronger with reason, logic, and empiricism. I felt like when attacked I could argue back, like I was valid and worth something again, and he instilled in me, as in many men, the confidence to stand up for ourselves once more. I don't watch him or his new content anymore. He's not the same guy since his and his family's health struggles, but I still very much wish him well and am grateful for those good years and that absolutely key work. Story 11. He starts by acknowledging young men's existence, basic humanity, and validating their feelings. There's a common idea that a lot of men feel invisible. For some, it's even worse, where they feel visible but unvalued. Like other people know they're hurting, they just don't care, or rail against these guys for not having the right to feel like they do. By just validating them, Peterson is in a position to influence them. What he does next, I think, is a few parts nonsense, but that's my opinion. Story 12. Because he teaches that accepting responsibility and moving forward under that burden is the path to a meaningful, not happy, life. Some of his work is, I think, genius. Some isn't for me. Some is so dense I still can't wrap my head around it. I've seen him live twice, shook his hand once, and own his books. I'm not a disciple, but I've learned a lot from him. Story 13. It's really simple. He cares about them. That's literally all it takes. These poor young guys are starved for attention and care. Women do not want them. Their parents are checked out or absent. Their communities are eroding. The world is punishing them constantly for being a specific gender. One weird old guy says, "Hey, that sucks and life is tough, but do not give up on yourself. Try hard to be a better person. That's all that's needed." They forgive the weird religious stuff. They forgive the strange opinions. They overlook the intolerance. He gets a free pass because he sees them. It would be really easy to change their minds about him. All we need to do is care more. But we do not, so they choose him. Lots of people stay in relationships with people that are not right for them just because they do not want to be alone. We're all searching for that one person that gets us. For them, that's Peterson. Story 14. He talks about the plight of younger men and their struggles. He is one of the very few sympathetic media figures those men have access to. Instead of collectively asking where things went wrong and how things for men can be improved, Society has instead collectively criticized Peterson and his followers. I wonder why that strengthens their attachment to Peterson rather than weakens it. Anyway, my sense of Peterson is that he appeals most to men who grew up without a quality father figure. For them, what Peterson says is the first time many of them are hearing those ideas. They have found that when they apply his suggestions to their lives, things have improved for them overall. Whereas men who grew up with a quality father figure might still respect Peterson, they often do not have any particular attachment to him since they have heard most of what he says their whole lives from a real father. Story 15. When he first became popular, there was a lot of controversial media that seemed hostile towards men, often for their nature rather than specific acts of behavior that were deemed immoral. Jordan Peterson was the antithesis of this and encouraged men to persevere. He also had a way of making it look effortless. He's obviously intelligent, but he seems skilled at avoiding traps laid by biased media. The Channel 4 interview with Kathy Newman was a particular highlight for me. It helped men understand how media was often deliberately made to be biased to generate interest. Story 16. A lot of young men know they aren't doing their best, and he is pretty motivational. Like, it's true. You should be cleaning your room and spending more time exercising and socializing as opposed to playing video games. Story 17. A lot of answers touch on the main points, but I will say I really enjoyed his psychology lectures because he is an engaging professor. He has a nice way of breaking down concepts like personality and the history of psychology that makes it easy to digest. I took a lot of psychology classes for my minor and I am familiar with the material, but he did a much better job of presenting the information than any of my professors, something I would expect from someone who taught at Harvard. Story 18. As a former Peterson fan, it was his explicit discussion of male-centered issues and argument for self-improvement to tackle life's challenges. As a young adult at the time, 21 to 22 years old, it strongly resonated with me to be more assertive and accountable for my choices and practices. He's fallen off in the last few years. His Twitter activity especially was hard to watch. However, I'll always be grateful for many of his messages, which I still agree with to this day. Story 19. Society. Of course, women would choose the bear. All men are homicidal rapists. Jordan, it's okay to be a man with masculine traits, and you should be celebrated. Story 20. Find the biggest possible load that you can carry and carry it. Decide to do it willingly. Men are hardwired to take on challenges and accomplish things, which takes discipline, all of which are great things to be decent men. Why is a man telling others to clean their rooms and slay their dragons so threatening, especially for the left? I'm not an alt-right person for simply enjoying common-sense psychology and philosophy. Story 21. He tells young men they matter. Full stop. If Jordan Peterson stuck to his area of study, he would be all right. I listened to him for a while when I felt I wasn't going to amount to anything. His message is simply that you keep trying because you can be valuable to someone. All men want to feel useful. Story 22. At least a lot of what I've heard through clips of his has pretty much been spot on. I think a lot of modern leftist rhetoric is really starting to crack the foundations of what it's meant to help with. It's just he takes it too far, so you have men hearing the good 60 to 80% and relating heavily to it and getting sucked into the remaining amount without a good counterargument to explain why it's too far. For example, the gender pay gap. The most recent article I read about the latest statistics was in Forbes and suggested that the gender pay gap was around 80% for women compared to men. But the normalized pay gap is above 99%, meaning for a similar job and similar experience, women are making the same as men. Now, we can discuss both of these statistics and their potential sociological causes, what they mean and how they impact the workforce, that's fine. But I recently had to sit through a company seminar that took the 80% statistic and lectured us as if it was the normalized data. As in, this is what's wrong with you, these numbers are unacceptable, and you each need to make a change, and so on. And you know that if you bring this misunderstanding up, you can kiss your promotion goodbye. So yes, lots of men keep getting told they're the source of so many problems. Lots of men have their own problems but are ignored on principle. And lots of men are feeling unheard, unappreciated, depressed, and getting angry because of it. It's the perfect breeding ground for snake oil salesmen. Story 23. Jordan Peterson starts from the premise that you are not a bad person. He goes on to say that life is bad for everyone. He concludes by giving practical advice that you will feel better by taking action, even if that action is as simple as cleaning your room. Peterson and Tate are both offering an antidote to alienation. One is worse than the other,